and there's a couple of modifications I want to make. I want to move the proclamation up first, and then the recognition of Officer of the Year up second, and then Gordon Thomas will be third. If there are no objections, the agenda will stand approved as modified. All right. Whereas Ted Christensen, affectionately called Mr. C by his students, has dedicated countless hours to thousands of Inglemoor High School music students, recruiting, teaching, and inspiring them while refining their musical talents and skills with vigor, compassion, sustained patience, and an infectious positive attitude. He has served as the director and leader of the Inglemoor High School Viking Marching Band, Pep Band, Wind Symphony, Symphonic Band, orchestra, and jazz bands, performing at football, basketball games, epic halftime and laser shows, 4th of July parades, school assemblies, pep rallies, concerts, faculty functions, North Shore solo and ensemble competitions, community events and benefits, regional and nationwide competitions, and Inglemoor graduations. And whereas a music director, Mr. C, oversaw the district band and orchestra programs, he managed the district music budget, supplied support to the secondary schools concerning resources, budget, buses, and assisted in hiring music teachers. And whereas he managed 60 paraprofessionals assisting various music programs, helped advocate for music as necessary when decisions were being made to cut or hurt programs, tripled the orchestra numbers, and worked hard to keep the existing programs well supported and funded and accessible to students, to name a few. Whereas Mr. C graduated from Seattle Pacific University in 1981 and student taught at Bothell High School in the music department with Bernie Ackerman, Dennis Behrens, and John Atzel. He began teaching instrumental music at Inglemoor in 1983, earned his master's in 1992, and became North Shore's music coordinator in 2000. He has taken music groups all over the U.S., as well as Canada and China. His groups have performed at Carnegie Hall, Avery Fisher Hall, in the Lincoln Center in New York. And whereas his marching band marched in Kenmore's Founders Day Parade, appeared on Good Morning America from Inglewood Community Club in 1988, and whereas Mr. C not only carried out a multitude of duties with a resounding crescendo of success, but went above and beyond in dedicating his time to students for individual and group performances, college competition, music prep, and many other student projects, all on top of being a devoted husband and dad. Whereas the results of his dedication can only begin to be measured by the many thousands of his former students who remained blessed with the love of music, which is a pleasure and sustaining force to be enjoyed throughout their lives. Whereas Mr. C is scheduled to retire and move on to the well-earned next chapter of his life, Mr. C's last day at Inglemoor High School is Friday, June 14th, 2019, making it the ideal day to honor him. Now, therefore, I, David Baker, Mayor of the City of Kenmore, Washington, on behalf of the City Council, am pleased to proclaim Friday, June 14th, Flag Day, as Ted Christensen Mr. C Day in the City of Kenmore, and wish Mr. C the very best in his future endeavors. So let's all remember, June 14th is Mr. C Day in Kenmore. And if you want to come up here, we will present this proclamation. Get a picture. Oh, geez.
3, 4, horns up.
Boy, I love a marching band.
They get to pass
Well, let's
now,
see.
right?
There's about, I don't know, 16 times as many or something like that. But thank you guys for this. Is the second night in a row you've done this. I appreciate it, you guys. Thank you very much.
Yeah, they give me one.
Well, to the city council, I'll keep my remarks brief, but I was thinking on the way down here, well, to begin with, my wife and I, about 20 minutes to 7, we just finished getting carpet, our complete condo carpeted. So that's why I'm dressed like this, and I apologize for that. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about my relationship with Kenmore. Things are going to come out. In about 1978, I was in the Seattle Pacific Wind Ensemble, and we were getting ready to head to Billings, Montana for a conference to play at. As kind of a dress rehearsal, we shared a concert with the Inglemore Band up at Inglemore High School. And I can remember driving out here thinking to myself, this is really in the middle of nowhere. And it was back in those days. He was a trumpet player, and he worked at the Kenmore Denny's. Remember when there was a Denny's here in Kenmore? He had the graveyard shift, and I was the only guy with the car. So I'd have to come down here in the middle of the night and pick him up. And again, I was thinking, this is out in the middle of nowhere. Well, as fate would have it, I've been teaching in this community for 36 years in the middle of nowhere. And Kenmore is not the middle of nowhere anymore. It has absolutely become a beautiful place. And your leadership has done that. It's amazing to me how the growth of this community, how beautiful our city's looking now, and the improvements, and it's really becoming, it's just amazing how much has changed in 40 years. And that's clearly due to your work and your leadership as city council members. So here I am at 36 years at Inglemore. It was a good fit for me in so many ways. North Shore is a great place to work and teach. I worked with wonderful colleagues. We moved our family. We were 1 mile out of the North Shore School District when we moved into the house up on Finn Hill, and had been promised a waiver by the superintendent in. Well, he got hired at Mercer Island, so the institutional memory had been forgotten. So we up and moved into the North Shore School District to make sure our kids would go through this system. Both of our girls went through Inglemore. My daughter and I are really grateful and thankful that we landed in this community. I want to thank you guys. This is the second afternoon in a row they've been out playing. They had an open house with, just tons of alumni students up at Inglemore yesterday. It was a very beautiful experience. And I'll just close with this. There's been an awful lot of nice things said about me, which I really appreciate. My family, Kathy and the girls, have been so supportive of all of this. But I think the big secret here is, and I know you kids have heard this a couple times now, I think I've taken more than I've given. The world's in good hands. These are wonderful kids, and I'm so going to miss this interaction daily with these guys because it's such a positive group of kids. Thank you to the City Council for coming tonight. Kathy, again, thank you. Kurt, thank you. Our booster president really is appreciated. You guys have it all figured out how to get back up there now, right? All right. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Now let's hear it one more time for the band. Thank you. Thank you all very much. We have lots of special stuff going on tonight. Next item on the agenda then is the Officer of the Year. He's our own Jeff Durrant, and the Chief Horvath has got a presentation he wants to make.
Mayor and City Manager, could you join me over here? So I'm awarding Master Patrol Officer Jeff Durrant the Officer of the Year for 2018. And yes, we're a little behind on this, but I'm saving that for a special occasion. I presented it to him at our team meeting that we held a couple of weeks ago, and now I'm officially presenting it. I feel Durrant was selected by his peers within the department. A couple of them are here to offer support. Laughs, smiles. Cheers. But I feel Durrant stepped forward when I had a previous MTO who gave up his position of leadership, and I was lacking one, and Jeff stepped forward and applied for the position. Awarded that position, went before the county selection board at precinct, and is also recognized as a mountain patrol officer with the county sheriff's office, not just here within the city. As a mountain patrol officer, Jeff is responsible for helping to train new deputies that come onto our department and that can work with the city. He has also taken something off of my hands, and that is the scheduling of the school resource officers for high school. Like oversight, Jeff essentially handles all the scheduling himself and has hand-selected those personnel that work as school resource officers at the high school. I have Jeff recognized from quite a long time ago. Not everybody is suited to be a school resource officer, so he has selectively handpicked how that best fit that role. Contact with the school district, the principal at the high school as well as at the middle school, and coordinate extra patrols as needed. We recently had some activity at the high school that required extra presence there, and spending extra time in Jeff to work with his team. That's our team to find that extra presence at the high school. Jeff has also been an acting supervisor for me when I've been out of town on vacation or training. That next step is becoming the acting sergeant or acting chief of the city. With that recognition, I'd like to present him the certificate for Officer of the Year for 2018. Jeff, thank you very much. Your service is very much appreciated.
All right. Next item On the agenda then is the report of our 2019 legislative session with Shelly Helder and Briahna Murray of Gordon Thomas Honeywell, Government Affairs. Ladies, if you please.
There we go. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Briahna Murray, and I'm joined by my colleague Shelly Helder. We're with Gordon Thomas Honeywell Government Affairs. The city contracts with our firm to provide Olympia lobbying services throughout the legislative session and in the interim months. This evening, we're here to attempt to condense 105 days of legislative action into 20 minutes and brief you on an overview of how the session went overall, as well as an outline of how your legislative priorities fared this past session. We're going to waste no time at all with that initial overview, and I'm going to start by just providing a high-level overview of what happened this last legislative session. The legislature operates on a 2-year cycle. The 2019 legislative session was the first year of that 2-year cycle and was scheduled to last 105 days. The session ended on time at midnight on April 28th, and it was the first time the legislature concluded a long legislative session on time in over a decade. They accomplished their primary objective, which was to adopt an operating capital and transportation budget, which I'll go over in more detail. But in addition to that, they also considered over 2,200 bills, 22 of which passed into law, which is a higher than usual passage rate. The Democratic Party held stronger majorities in both the House and the Senate than in recent history, and because of that, we think that might be part of the reason we saw a higher passage rate. Additionally, we saw a number of large policy initiatives pass into law, including raising the cap on how school districts levy property taxes, funding long-term care, requiring 100% clean energy supply, moving the state's presidential primary from May to March, raising the legal smoking age to 21, and much more that I'm sure you read in your newspaper throughout the last 105 days, and much more than we could pretend to cover this evening. Some of the hot topics that got a lot of media coverage that did not pass into a law included eliminating the death penalty, imposing a low-carbon fuel standard, requiring sex education in public schools, banning plastic bags and plastic straws, and imposing a capital gains tax. So as you can see, amongst the 2,200 bills, a lot of diversity in the proposals. The legislature, though, did focus a lot of time and energy on their operating, capital, and transportation budgets. I want to provide you with just an overview of where they landed on each of those. As a reminder, the state's fiscal year runs from July 1 of 2019 through June 30th of 2020. The first budget I want to review is the operating budget. It funds the day-to-day operations of state agencies, including the K-12 education system, institutions of higher education, and the state's mental health system. Prior to the beginning of the legislative session, the Office of Financial Management indicated that the operating budget, despite experiencing an increase in revenue from positive economic growth, was facing a $3 billion budget shortfall, in large part because previous legislative decisions made in earlier years were driving up the costs for the 2019-21 biennium. The legislature inevitably ended up balancing the budget with that shortfall due to a fortuitous March revenue forecast that added $550 million in anticipated revenue, and by raising approximately $850 million in new revenue through several tax increases, particularly around changes to the state's real estate excise tax and adjustment to the state's B&O tax. The legislature also increased a B&O tax on certain business categories and dedicated that revenue to higher education, resulting in a total 2019-21 operating budget that was $52.4 billion, and approximately a 20% increase from the previous biennial budget. The capital budget is the size of the capital budget is dependent on how large the operating budget is. The larger the operating budget, the larger the capital budget. The capital budget goes to fund bricks and mortar construction that's not transportation related for all the state agencies, and also funds several different community projects. This year's capital budget was one of the largest in state history and totaled $4.9 billion. It included some increased revenue, the hazardous substance tax, which is a tax on oil, to make it a volumetric tax rather than a value-based tax. That increased funding for the Model Toxics Control Account and dedicated a revenue stream for stormwater projects, which are two of the items that are funded within that capital budget. In addition to that, there were several investments made in local and community projects, as well as significant funding in K through 12 school construction. The final budget that the legislature adopted was the transportation budget. Transportation budget is funded primarily through gas tax revenues, vehicle late fees, and other transportation-related revenues. You'll remember that in 2015, the legislature enacted the latest gas tax increase and funded a 16-year plan of projects called Connecting Washington. This year, there was relatively little new money coming in, so the legislature focused on continuing to implement that 16-year package. There's just not any revenue available to make new investments. The chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, Senator Steve Hobbs, did indicate that that our state is in need of new transportation investments, and in order to do that, they needed to have a conversation about the next transportation revenue package, which is being referred to as Forward Washington. So you have Connecting Washington that's already adopted, and then Forward Washington that's being proposed. He put forward a proposal that included a $15 carbon pollution fee and a 6-cent gas tax increase that would have generated $15 billion over 10 years. That proposal passed out of committee, but then otherwise didn't go any further. As we look forward toward the 2020 session, we expect those conversations to continue, probably not just in 2020, but in 2021. You'll remember that the Connecting Washington package that was enacted in 2015 was starting to be talked about in 2012. So it takes many years to get those transportation packages passed. So that's a brief overview of each of the budgets and where they landed. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shelly to talk about your specific legislative priorities.
Good evening. Well, leading up to the 2019 session, we worked with you all to identify the city's top legislative priorities, and you all adopted your 2019-20 legislative agenda. And so that's a biennial agenda that reflects the state's biennial budget cycle. On the screen are the items that were on the city's biennial legislative agenda, as well as a few others that came up as the session went along. So I'm going to go over each item, what we did to advance them, and then what the outcome was at the end of this session. So as you all know, the Lake Point site has some extraordinary costs associated with its development. And so in an effort to help develop the Lake Point site, we supported legislation, Senate Bill 5564, which is really a local financing tool for jurisdictions to spur economic development. This was a bill that had previously been introduced, and so the concept was being brought back. It's very similar to the local revitalization financing or local infrastructure financing, that tools that the legislature has authorized previously, and the state's contribution has been maxed. And so there's an effort amongst many jurisdictions to create another financing mechanism for local jurisdictions. Kenmore is really, and Lake Point in particular, is really the poster child for the type of project that this tool is hoping to support. It had a favorable hearing in the policy committee in the Senate. Your city manager came down to Olympia and testified in support of the bill, and it did advance out of committee. It stalled when it hit the finance or the fiscal committee in the Senate, the Ways and Means Committee. We did testify on the city's behalf, again, speaking to the challenges that the Lake Point site poses and why this type of tool would be so helpful. Some of the resistance, the concern that we heard, there were many proposals this year regarding a credit against the state sales tax. This is how that tool functions, and there was some resistance to eliminate, or basically the state losing out on their sales tax. And so that was one of the reasons. Another reason is the way that the bill was drafted, there's concern that it was drafted too broadly, so that projects that would otherwise be developed could use this tool, when really this tool is about helping to support projects that wouldn't otherwise happen, a project site like Lake Point. So we coordinated closely with the Association of Washington Cities on this legislation, and we'll be working with them over the interim to redraft the legislation and continue to advance this, because we do think this is continuing to be an issue that's important for cities across the state, but especially for Kenmore because of the Lake Point site.
And if I could just add to that, Senator Frocht and I discussed what we call but-for language in that particular bill. Shelly just touched on the point that the legislature was concerned that it would, if they offered this tax increment financing tool, that it would just be icing on the cake for developers. And instead, it needs to be more of a tool where the project just wouldn't go without some sort of tool like this. And so, but for tax increment financing, the project or the projects that would be considered would not happen. Lake Point, we would think, would fit in that category. So that got explored. It didn't ever get legs to insert that sort of language that would appease those concerns. Also, the other thing we tried to clarify was in the state's fiscal note on this bill, they looked at it as like an expenditure, like they'd be, not, they'd be losing out on the revenue. But the point we tried to make is if you truly do it for projects that need this tool, the state will see a massive return on investment through other new tax revenues that would come from projects like Lake Point. We tried to make that point as well. It didn't seem to resonate with very many legislators, but we gave it a shot.
Yeah, thanks for that. The next item on the city's legislative agenda was a request regarding 68th Avenue pedestrian session, that transportation revenues were going to be tight, and so we crafted a transportation request that was that took into consideration the state's transportation budget challenges. So it was a modest. We worked closely with Representative Valdez. He's the only member of the city's delegation that sits on a transportation committee, and so he was really the champion of this request. For that reason, this funding was included in the House proposed transportation budget. Unfortunately, the Senate proposed transportation budget did not include funding for any new projects, including the city's request. Through the negotiation process, because the Senate budget had no projects and the House budget had several projects, the final budget, many projects were left off the list, including 68th Avenue. So while that was definitely an unfortunate outcome, Representative Valdez still looked for a way to help the city. And so the next item on the list was transfer of funds from State Route 522 to the West Sammamish Bridge. And so if you will recall, back in 2015, when the legislature passed the Connecting Washington package, we helped the city to secure $12 million for improvements to State Route 522, and then $8 million for the West Sammamish Bridge replacement. That funding is distributed over several biennia. And so as we were working with city staff and looking at the challenges to implementing these projects, transferring $4 million from 522 project to West Sammamish Bridge became a really good idea in order to make both projects work. This was a delicate request because the Connecting Washington package was passed with the stipulation that any project that comes in under cost or has cost savings, that cost savings goes back to the state. And so, and that money that goes back to the state, half of it goes towards maintenance and operations, and half of it goes into a pot to be used for the next transportation package. So simply raising the issue of saying, hey, can we take $4 million from one project and put it to another? We ran the risk of losing the $4 million altogether. So again, Representative Valdez was really a leader on this issue for us, and made it possible for that transfer to be included in the House proposed budget and also in the final budget. So now as the, the final transportation budget stands, there's 12 million for the West Sammamish Bridge project, 8 million for 522, and there's 11 million of the West Sammamish Bridge funding that's available in the 2019-21 biennium.
And that's going to make all the difference for not only West Sammamish Bridge, but also for our other projects, because it's going to free up city money that we had allocated to the bridge. We'll be able to put it into projects like walkways and waterways.
The next item on the list was our capital budget requests, and we had two this year. The first was for $150,000 for improvements at Twin Springs Park. And these are for drainage and parking to be able to open the park to the public. Leading up to the 2019 session, we had Senator Frocht come out to the park, and we did a tour with him, had him experience firsthand the need for drainage and parking. And so he was definitely motivated to make sure that that funding was included. The second request was for $2 million for pedestrian and bicycle improvements along the Kenmore portion of the Lake Washington Loop Trail. And I think the history behind this request is, you probably all know of this as the Juanita Drive project. And we packaged it as a Lake Washington Loop Trail because, again, we knew that the transportation budget was going to be tight. And so when you talk about bike ped and you're talking about it on a roadway, the legislature thinks transportation. If you talk about it as a trail, I think we can pose it as recreation, and it can be capital budget. So that was strategic. It was also taking into account the fact that our senator is the lead budget writer for the Senate capital budget, and so we wanted to set ourselves up for success as best we could. So the proposed House and Senate capital budgets, there was no funding for Twin Springs in the House budget. It was included in the Senate budget and also included in the final, and it wasn't just $150,000, it was actually $155,000, which is one of the reasons that was included is because when the city receives that funding from the state, it goes through the Department of Commerce, and they take a 3% administrative fee. Knowing that, we calculated that into the amount that was requested to make sure that when the money gets to you, you get the full 150. So even though 155 is included in the budget, you'll be seeing less than that, 3% less than that, but enough to do the project.
I have to give kudos to Shelly, because she's saying when we completed the capital budget forms, but really it was when Shelly was revising the capital budget forms, she said, oh, what if we accounted for this 3%? So that additional 5,000 is all credit to Shelly.
And so the outcome of the Lake Washington Loop Trail, there was no funding included in either the House or the Senate proposed capital budgets for that. And I'll get to this a little bit on the next slide, but one of the reasons there was a very large number of capital budget requests that came through the local community project grant program. There were $770 million worth of requests and $163 million funded. So our senator among others, had a very difficult task of prioritizing and making sure that resources were distributed across the state. And one of the ways that he wanted to make sure that his district still saw investments from the capital budget is through the grant programs that the city competes in. So leading up again to the 2019 session, city staff applied for grants from the Washington Wildlife Recreation Program, as well as the Aquatic Land Enhancement Account. The projects for Squires Landing and Log Boom Park were ranked amongst other projects throughout the state. On the WWRP list, the city's projects were ranked lower than the recommended funding level. However, through the ALEA grant program, the city's projects were ranked number 12 and number 15 on a list of 15 projects. So due to where the city's projects ranked, we kind of played an elevated role in advocating for the full $6.6 million. When the governor released his budget, the funding for ALEA was below the level that would have allowed the city to receive any funding. So we testified before the Senate Ways and Means Committee indicating that we supported the full funding amount and what that would mean to a city like Kenmore and the region as a whole, who would be able to benefit from the improvements at Logboom Park and Squires Landing. When the House released their budget, it was also below the funding level that would be needed. And finally, when the Senate released their budget, it was at the full $6.6 million. And so again, we testified and we thanked them for funding it at a level that would mean investments in the city of Kenmore. And ultimately, the final budget does include the full 6.6, which means $500,000 for Squires Landing and a little over $405,000 for Logboom Park.
This slide. So the $2 million for Lake Washington Loop Trail, i.e. Juanita Drive, the timing is such on that project that we could probably go back to the legislature again next session. It's a short session supplemental budget year, but thoughts on that, going back for a second bite at that apple?
Yes, I appreciate the question because this is something where Senator Frocht is committed to working with the city and trying to get funding in the supplemental year. It is won't be as robust of a budget in the supplemental year, but he did want to continue working with the city on this request.
Good.
And I think we can advance the request as a capital funding request and then also monitor the ongoing conversations around a transportation revenue package. And if we need to repackage it into being more of a transportation work available, we can do so. The last item, in addition to adopting your top legislative priorities, you guys also adopt a second sheet of additional priority items. We work on several of these issues throughout the session, and we partner with the Association of Washington Cities and the Sound Cities Association on several items as well. Just to report back to you all, and you can certainly see it in their materials for yourself, but the Association of Washington Cities described this session as a solid legislative session. For the most part, state shared revenues that cities receive from the state were maintained. They weren't swept in any way. The exception of that, of course, is the Public Works Assistance account. We've seen that account swept by the state in previous years, and this year was no different. There was $160 million swept out of that account and left only about $85 million in the account for grants and loans. In the past, the city has benefited from the Public Works Assistance account grant and loan program. So of course, we're disappointed to see that diversion once again occur. There were two bills that passed where you'll see an increase in state revenues for city causes. The first is around sales tax. The state adjusted their threshold on collecting sales tax from out-of-state internet retailers selling goods to customers within the state. So if a Kenmore resident purchases something online from a business that is outside of the state of Washington, the state of Washington is now going to collect sales tax on that, and they will remit the local portion of that sales tax to Kenmore. It's not anticipated to generate a significant amount of revenue. They're estimating $13 million a year across all cities. How much City of Kenmore will receive in that will be dependent upon how many internet sales your residents make. The second area where we'll see an increase in revenue is in local stormwater funding. For years, cities have been asking for a reliable grant resource for local stormwater funding projects. The change that the legislature made in the hazardous substance tax will result in an increase in grant funding for local stormwater projects through the Department of Ecology. So that's another area where cities stand to benefit from more revenue. There were four areas that we worked on that are on your slide there that we worked on with the Association of Washington Cities and with the legislative delegation specifically for you all. The first is on airborne nuisances, House Bill 1637. This is a bill we worked on for several legislative sessions with Representative Jerry Paulette. This bill, really the outcome is no different than previous legislative sessions. We continue to get opposition from the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, this year primarily around technical concerns. Anything you want to add?
No.
I think that's, we're looking at how we move forward with that issue. It's a challenging one, and I'll just say that Representative Paulette has been a great advocate for it. The second item issued there, listed there is minimum density, and I'll also add in that there was a robust discussion around accessory dwelling units. The legislature felt a lot of pressure to take action to address affordable housing in the region, and one of the ways that this was articulated was that a cause of affordable housing issues or housing affordability is a lack of increased density in certain communities, and that certain communities needed to be forced to zone to have more density in order to address the housing affordability issue. So we saw these bills to mandate cities to accept more density and also mandate that accessory dwelling units be allowed on most single-family lots and remove a lot of city regulatory authority in both of those areas. As city advocates, we were very vocal in saying that is not the cause of housing affordability. In fact, many cities have chosen to upzone in appropriate areas with good transit access, and the reason housing isn't being built in those areas is really from market-driven, not zoning-oriented reasons. Where the legislature landed was on incentivizing cities to take action rather than mandating. So they approved House Bill 1923 in a significantly amended form that would allow a city to receive up to $100,000 to take 2 action items to increase density. And there's a list of menu items within the bill that outlines the actions that are available to be eligible for this $100,000 grant. The other option under the bill is to enact a housing action plan to strategically look at how to address housing affordability in the community. And again, the city would be eligible to receive a $100,000 grant under that proposal. I want to just give a shout out to city staff on both the minimum density and the accessory dwelling unit proposals. There were dozens of iterations of those bills, and we worked closely with your staff to review those many, many iterations to make sure that the feedback we were providing to our legislative delegation was on point and consistent with your local viewpoints.
Yeah, and little old Kenmore had kind of a role in actually shaping that particular policy. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think that especially the incentive approach was, and utilizing grant funds as the incentive approach was a key part of that.
Yeah.
And I think also, just to add to that, Representative Paulette was a key player in advocating for local control on this issue in particular.
Yeah, as chair of the local government committee, he was very engaged on this issue and a huge, huge champion.
And a big thanks to Lori Anderson and Debbie Bent for the role you played in
Thank you.
in playing defense on that.
Thank you very much. The legislature did take action to address affordable housing through passing 2 different bills that provide increased revenue to the city for affordable housing projects. The first is House Bill 1406, which is a 0.0073 credit against the state sales tax that the city can enact. And again, it's a credit, not an increase in the state sales tax. So it's revenue that would otherwise be going into the state general fund that you can redirect to the local level and invest in affordable housing projects. I believe that Arch is an area where you can utilize that revenue. It does have a timer on it, though. You have to take action on a resolution within 6 months of the effective date of the bill and actually enact the credit within 12 months of the effective date, and the effective date is July 28th. So you have to take advantage of it in a timely manner or the money goes elsewhere. House Bill 1219 provides cities with flexibility on your second quarter real estate excise taxes to dedicate a portion of that revenue to affordable housing if you can demonstrate that you're otherwise meeting your capital facilities plan. There's also a clock on that bill. If you utilize that flexibility by June 30th, which is very near, if you utilize it by June 30th, then you can use an unlimited amount of real estate excise taxes on affordable housing. If you don't use it prior to that date, then you're capped at using no more than $1 million or 25% of your overall collections on affordable housing. So there's a clock on that one as well. And then the final bill, also around housing, is on mobile homes. Shelly, do you want to cover this one?
Sure, I'll just add, I mean, I won't go into a lot of detail on either one of them, but I will say that these bills were really brought forward and to assist with mobile home park owners, or mobile home owners, to ensure that when there are changes made to rental agreements or lease agreements, that there's adequate notice and that there's fairness between the park owners and the mobile homeowners. So both of these bills go into effect on July 28th. Senate Bill 5183 in particular provides additional notice if there's going to be any changes to mobile home park changes or closures, and then also ensures that if utilities were originally calculated as part of rent and for whatever reason the utility ends up going directly to the tenant, that amount is deducted from the rent, so that the mobile home owner is not paying that utility twice. So it's something that, again, seems like it should have not required legislation, but it did. And so, again, both of those bills go into effect on July 28th.
I think we're to the last slide. Before we turn it over to all of you to see if you have any questions, I want to just give an extra thank you to city staff. Advocating and being successful in Olympia is a lot of hard work, and it really requires a team effort. It requires a lot of responsiveness from city staff as we look at and review bills, prepare funding requests, and it requires your leadership as well, being willing to work with our legislative delegation. And I guess that's the other thank you I would make, and that's to our legislative delegation. I know on June 28th, next week, you guys have a formal opportunity to thank them. But I'll just say that Senator Frocht, Representative Paulette, and Representative Valdez are great partners in Olympia. They work a lot with both of us and see a lot of both of us and are always happy to have their door open and hear everything we have to say as in terms of what they can do to help the Kenmore community. So I just can't say enough good things about the delegation. And with that, anything, we're happy to answer questions.
I'll just say that that's June 18th at 6 p.m. here at City Hall.
Questions?
Did you say July 28th?
Councilmember Smith.
Thanks to both of you for coming, and that was a great detailed recap. I appreciate it. I have a question on your last, the second to the last slide on the affordable housing, and you talked about what we have to do by certain dates, and specifically there was some, the credit that we lose the local control if we don't enact it. So is that project specific that you have to enact, or do you have to just enact an ordinance or something that says what you're going to do?
Correct. So you just have to enact the ordinance. So it's a 0.0073 credit against the state sales tax. So within 6 months of July 28th, if you adopt the resolution, then you're putting the stake in the ground that's communicating to other partners like, hey, we're going to be drawing down this revenue. And then you have an additional 6 months to actually enact it. Once you enact it, the state will begin making distributions to you an additional sales tax, and you're restricted in how you could spend it. The hope is that you'll bond against that revenue source and spend it, or enter into an interlocal agreement with Arch or with other regional partners and how it would be expended. And there are limitations on how it can be spent outlined in the statute. It has to be spent on affordable housing, serving 60% or lower AMI. But in terms of timing, you don't have to wait till there's a project in the Kenmore community ready to go in order to enact it.
Okay. And is there any time limit at all on if you're accumulating the funds that you can just have them accumulate until an appropriate project comes along? Are you penalized by not spending it immediately?
I will say there's no penalty in the statute. I would say the longer you collect revenue and you let it sit, probably the more pressure you start to get from the state and from other stakeholders about why aren't you putting these valuable resources into the ground to be working for the
Okay, but
community.
you don't actually lose it or anything?
No, you don't lose
Okay,
it.
no, that, great,
Yeah.
thank you. Oh, actually, one other thing, just why, it's sort of on the same thing. On the mandates on housing, I really, really appreciate the work you did on the incentive approach versus the penalty and the loss of local control and planning. I think that's really, really important, so thank you very much.
Thank you. And make sure you pass along the thanks to Representative Paulette as
I will.
well. He was a huge champion.
Right.
Councilmember Curtis.
Going back to the reallocation of the tax for the affordable housing, do we as a city have a plan for getting in on this deal?
Yeah, for the sales tax credit, we do. Yeah, we got some numbers, I believe, from AWC or somewhere, that they think it's about $19,000 a year.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yeah, I was a little confused. So 1406, you have to enact something 6 months from July 28th. But 1219 sounded like it has a shorter fuse. And can you articulate the distinction there too, not just on
Sure.
the timing?
Yeah, so House Bill 1219 says you can utilize your second quarter real estate excise tax revenue for affordable housing if you say that you've been able to meet at least 2 years of the obligations under your capital facilities plan. So you have to kind of pass a resolution saying we've fully funded our capital facilities plan, we have excess real estate excise tax revenues. You then at that point can take those excess real estate excise tax revenues and dedicate it to affordable housing. If you do it prior to June 30th, you can use an unlimited amount of real estate excise tax revenues for affordable housing in perpetuity. If you don't do it prior to June 30th, then you can only use up to $1 million or 25% of your second quarter collections.
Okay, so not just your Q2. I mean, at the beginning, when you said you could use your quarter two
Yeah. so
excess, or is it?
It's only second quarter rate. Yeah.
0.25%.
Yeah, second quarter percent. So you have
Okay.
two different quarter percents of real estate excise taxes.
Not
And-
calendar quarter two. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
like, what?
yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
And my thought on that is our real estate excise tax really is tied up in our capital projects for the foreseeable future, funding the walkways and waterways and other projects. My thought is not to do anything between now and June 30th because our real estate excise tax is pretty well tied up anyway.
Which is, I'll just note, that's a fairly consistent scenario in most communities. There are some that have been able to take advantage of it, but between the two bills that passed, House Bill 1406 definitely presents the more helpful option.
Just a point of clarification, but if we pass something, we could in the future have that latitude, right?
Correct.
So there's really no downside in passing it.
You have to somehow meet all the obligations of your capital facilities plan in order to do it, which it
Right.
doesn't sound like.
Not at the moment, but I mean, this would allow us.
Right. I think in order to even do it now, between now and June 30th, you have to declare that you've met your obligations under your capital facilities plan. So if you're not in a position to do that, then it's not an option that's available to you, which is fairly consistent across many different cities.
Councilmember Smith.
Just two more questions. On the Lake Point, the sales tax issue, is that something that we have to wait until the next 2-year cycle, or can we come back to legislature next year and re-scope that?
Yeah, good
Yeah.
question. We do not have to wait. So next year, I think there is a plan in coordination with the Association of Washington Cities to bring forward not only kind of a restructured bill around financing tool for a project like Lake Point, but also so that the way that that bill is structured, it's kind of tax increment financing light, because the Washington State Constitution does not allow for true tax increment financing. So there's the conversation is about advancing that legislation, as well as potentially pursuing true tax increment financing, which would require an amendment to the Constitution. So pursuing both paths, knowing that one definitely has a little bit easier road ahead of it.
Okay, thank you. And then, oh, did you have something?
Yeah, I would just note that, so the House is going to be electing a new speaker on July 31st. And one of the main opponents to tax increment financing in Washington State has been the speaker in previous years. So we're hopeful that with new leadership that we will see an opportunity for either of those proposals to advance more than they have in previous years.
Great, thank you. And then the other question is, on the sweeping of the funds from the Public Works account, that seems to happen every session, and when a budget, you know, the budget's gone up 20%, if they can't make it with that, where is that even coming from that?
We had several legislators introduce bills this session that would have not only not swept the Public Works Assistance account, but would have restored revenue to the Public Works Assistance account. And I will say, early in the legislative session, there was a lot of optimism that those bills would advance this session. Unfortunately, even with economic revenue growth and with the tax revenue that was raised this year, and with the budget being 20% larger, there are a lot of demands within that operating budget still around implementing the K through 12 McCleary solutions. And so I don't know that I see the pressures on the operating budget going away anytime soon, and it's really that pressure that's generating the sweep. So until there's some sort of an alleviation on the operating budget pressure, I think we'll continue to see it. The legislature did fund a study to occur this interim that's looking at the state tax structure and looking at reforming the state tax structure. So perhaps from that, there's a way of there being less pressure on that operating budget. But without that, I'm not sure that I see their behavior changing. Shelly, please disagree with me.
I would agree with that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
One piece of good news is they did not touch the $1 million low-interest loan that's for us for the 190th 61st Avenue culvert.
Right.
So we're going to be able to put in a fish passable culvert there, and that's funded from that account.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry it's not more pleasant news.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the job you guys do for us.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, well done. Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is citizen comments. It's an opportunity you to express your views on issues that are important to you and to the community. We ask that you please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and there will be a timer on the screen. So, clerk, please call the first person.
Melanie O'Kane. Hi. Good evening. I'm Melanie O'Kane, Kenmore resident and ally to the LGBTQIA community and member of the Kenmore Pride Picnic Planning Group. First, I want to thank you for your leadership and commitment to the Kenmore community and commitment to equity for all members of the Kenmore community, and for adding the Pride Proclamation to the agenda of the June 17th meeting. I'm actually here to invite you to the picnic. It's Saturday, June 22nd from 1 to 4 at at Town Square, and it's going to be amazing. We have a whole host of local sponsors and an enthusiastic response from Kenmore residents to the event. We're planning this Pride picnic to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in New York City. The Stonewall riots were what initiated which launched the Pride movement. and civil rights progress in the LGBTQIA+ community that we see today and need to vigorously uphold. With this in mind, we respectfully ask that you consider updating the proclamation next week from Pride Week to proclaiming June as Pride Month, and raise the Pride flag as soon as you can, because we know that our community would love to see that rainbow flag flying proud above City Hall during our event and through the end of June. We really respectfully request that you give this consideration, and thank you for all that you do for the city of Kenmore and our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Kane.
Nadia Regina Silver.
Hello, my name is Nadia Regina Silver. You guys have probably seen me around town at certain city events. You've also seen me up here before a few times. I'm actually also here with the Kenmore Pride Picnic Planning Group. I am the promotional manager, pending approval, of course, of the permit of the event. And I am here to reflect on what she said about, how we have some drumming up of some extremely great interest. Being the promotional manager and millennial that I am, I have told everybody about it. I have festooned 40+ different Facebook groups. I'm searching for items, donate, please gift, whatever you can. We need plates, we need this, da, da, da. And that alone seemed to have everybody's like, oh my gosh, Kenmore is having a pride picnic, excuse you? So for whatever reason, apparently, no one thought Kenmore would actually be open enough to have a pride picnic. So I have done a lot of walking on the Northwest Town Square corner today. My ankles will tell you all about it, to get more interest. And it turns out we have local business interest. I've talked to them myself today. So if we can get, first of all, again, thank you so much for your support thus far, but I would like to get this to be an annual thing. I support the flag raising as well, and also the proclamation for the whole month being Pride, because I'm not an ally. I am LGBTQIA. So yes, I'm a millennial, but I am an elder millennial, so I do understand where you guys are coming from as well. So that is pretty much what I'm here for. We've had, like I said, the huge response. We've had 100 people already come to me in a 24-hour period going, how to do, can we, and so on and so forth. So I'm looking forward to this to being an annual thing. Once we get the permit cleared, I'm ready to rock and roll. This is the week, next 2 weeks, we've got to get it all done. So I want to put Kenmore on the map. We're literally in the middle of the 2 greatest cities on this side of the Washington state, so why not? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Silver.
Sarah Hayachi.
Good evening, Sarah Hayashi, Kenmore resident, 14615 81st Avenue Northeast. I'm here on behalf of the Arts of Kenmore, and we just wanted to, myself and Tricia and Elizabeth, Carissa Webster is actually in Kansas City right now, but we wanted to thank you all so much for all of your support, for your partnership with the Arts of Kenmore, especially with the Legends Bench. I'm afraid I take considerable advantage of all of you and Mayor Baker. Not only do you attend the dedication for Legends Bench, and then you, which also, at the same time at Rhododendron Park, our city, well, we had a pop-up story walk, also had an installation at Rhodey Park at the same time. And then I made you come to our opening for the new gallery exhibit. Thank you very much. It's a partnership, your support. We cannot do what we do. Thank you so much for allowing us to not totally do what we want to do, but we'll get there. And Rob, no, I mean, it is. It's like I can't say we do it. You know, we are trying to be, this partnership goes both ways. We have to be really respectful of what you guys are going through too. And this is not just about, what we want as artists. It's about what our community wants and what works. And what works for our whole community, not just a few. But yeah, and working with Rob, working with the whole city and the staff, thank you very much for all your support.
Thank you,
That's
Ms.
all.
Hayashi.
Karina File.
Hello, I'm Karina File, a Kenmore resident and also a member of the Kenmore Pride Group. And in concurring with our group partners, we definitely would want that flag raised for the month of June. It is a month of June. The proclamation for the month of June is appropriate, as it is about 40% of the targeted violence is that of 17% of the population that is LGBTQ. And when you look at that kind of a number, the reason why we acknowledge recognizing minorities and privileged diverse populations in situations like this is we wouldn't want to minimize this as a city and reduce the awareness that comes with pride. So respectfully asking for that proclamation to be amended next week. Additionally, it's been a wonderful opportunity to work with the city on a Love Note to Kenmore project of a Pride picnic. And with that, having a community gathering where our community comes together and our promotional team has worked really hard to work with the longevity of partnering with the city and business for inclusion. But with that has come a little bit of a hardship. So we're grateful that the city is working with us on that permit. The hardship is around food handling. It's simple, and understandably there are many different types of food handling permits and events, types of permits. So what we're asking for is that this is a community gathering, that the recognition of the food handler permit for the one person overseeing that event be applicable. And it does work. It works all across our state with other groups that feed our community. And I believe that is a sensible opportunity, given that this is not a profit event. This is a community event to bring us together. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. File.
Vicki Graylin.
Hello, I'm Vicki Graylin, and I live in Kenmore. And I'm just here to say make a few comments just as a homeowner tonight. Today I received this mailing from Puget Sound Energy. They're putting in a new kind of meters, smart meters. I've done a little bit of research. I'm not an expert, but these meters have some very bad press. There are concerns about health effects. There are concerns about their accuracy. I have concerns about Puget Sound Energy's basic competence. I have had 2 power outages this year. The first one was 36 hours in January. I question the competence and the transparency of Puget Sound Energy in general. And the research I've done so far on the FAQ page is that I can opt out, which is my plan. And I just wanted to register my concern for the health and safety of my neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grayland.
John Hendrickson.
Good evening, council members. John Hendrickson, Kenmore, Washington. I'd like to discuss, go back through the facts and circumstances that are leading up to tonight's critical area ordinance update, specifically with the new expansion of the PAW exception for public agency utility exception. And, you know, back in 1935, the Supreme Court, there was a landmark Supreme Court case, Gregory versus Helverling, that said for tax purposes, all loopholes are legal to use. you can be as amoral as you want in this country when it comes to your taxes. If the loophole is there, you can just take it, no matter what the original intent was. It seems to be that the council kind of embraces that same principle with your update with the critical area ordinance and your exemption that you're providing for yourselves to do work in the critical areas and not protect the critical areas as you do your own projects, but we can't. So the expanded paw that you have really goes beyond, it's not just being amoral. I think as you were found in 2016 and what we were doing in 2008, violating the law again. Okay? The expansion that you have does not protect critical area ordinance, so you're violating the Growth Management Act. And it also violates state law on exemptions, as you have no legal authority to create your own expanded exemptions from environmental protection laws. We have an exemption for utility companies because the toll pipeline has to go through the Swamp Creek. You have to let them do it, but you don't have to let them do it there's no exception for recreation. And you don't have a legal authority to create one, but you did it anyway. Reminiscent of what we did in 2008 and again in 2016, just repeating ourselves again. The GMA requires a reasoned approach. Where's the reasoned approach in this? You know, it's more like, instead of a tax avoidance, it's its best available science avoidance to try to get your way. And rather than spending the bulk of your city resources on trying to game the system with this new change, you really should have been thinking about focusing on monitoring, documenting, and evaluating the results of our last 30 years of critical area regulation. That's what you're. So in the critical areas 2018 handbook states that the environmental protection laws should be applied consistently to everyone, including the city. You actually should be setting an example on how the system should work, and you're doing the opposite. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrickson.
Mayor, there's nobody else signed up.
Anybody else wishing to be heard? Ms. O'Kane, Ms. Silver, and Ms. File, thank you very much for your comments. We are going to be discussing this later tonight. Thank you, Ms. Hayashi. We really appreciate everything you do for the arts of Kenmore and what you've done for our community. Ms. Graylin, thank you. We are going to have PSE here tonight, and I'm sure one of us will ask questions. Mr. Hendrickson, thank you very much for your comments. We are going to be looking at critical areas again. With that, consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And I'll second. Any discussion? Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yeah, I just want to pull the KWAC report off just so we have a little bit more discussion about it.
It's item number?
D, sounds like. I'm not in front of it right at the moment.
D. So you want to pull D? Okay. So, there's a motion on the table to approve the consent agenda minus item D. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the consent agenda as modified, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda stands approved, minus item D. Now, item D.
Your Honor, for the sake of time of other people being here, we could move that to the end of the business agenda, if you so choose.
Okay, you want to move item D to the end of the business agenda? Is there a general agreement with that? Okay, fine. It'll be moved to the end of the business agenda. All right, next item on the agenda is a public hearing Ordinance number 190488, 190489, and 190490, amending the city's critical area regulations and shoreline master plan. Ms. Spence, Ms. Anderson.
Good evening, Council. We also have Amy Sumi, who is the consultant the city used with Shannon and Wilson, so she's also available if there are any specific questions, is more science-based. So we're here this evening for the public hearing and consideration of adoption of the ordinances. The Planning Commission presented their recommendations, and we've also given you an update on the changes that are in front of you. So we're not intending to do a full presentation of what those changes are, because we've done that previously in public meetings. But I know Laurie wanted to say a few things before the public hearing was opened.
Good evening. So as Debbie mentioned, tonight you're looking at 3 different ordinances. One is the Critical Area Regulations Amendments. The other one is an amendment to the comprehensive plan, the shoreline sub-element of the comprehensive plan related to shorelines. And the third is related to shoreline regulations that then follow on from that comprehensive plan element. The Planning Commission, as you recall, held a hearing on all of these changes. And after they had held that hearing, then we developed another recommendation based on some changes that ecology had recommended, and then revisiting that, we thought we better make one more adjustment to enhancing degraded wetland buffers. So we talked about that at your meeting last time. But because of that, it necessitated that we have the council hold their own public hearing. So that's the purpose of tonight's public hearing, because the recommendation is different from what was in front of the Planning Commission. So the critical area regulations address wetlands, streams and lakes, fish and wildlife habitats of importance, geologically hazardous areas, flood hazard areas, and areas of groundwater susceptibility. Those are the critical area regulations. And then the Shoreline Master Program, which includes the comp plan amendments that I talked about, also includes regulatory standards within the jurisdiction adjacent to Swamp Creek, the Sammamish River, and Lake Washington. So that's what is before you. Again, you reviewed these on May 13th and May 20th, and you had questions and comments, and we incorporated the ordinances that are before you tonight. So staff is recommending that you adopt these amendments. This evening, we received at 6:33 p.m. An email from the Department of Commerce, and they asked that I read that into the hearing record. So when the hearing is opened, so with that, unless you have preliminary questions, yes.
Any questions before we open the hearing? Seeing none, I will declare the hearing open to amend the city's critical area regulations and shoreline master plan. Clerk, please call the first person.
We have one person signed up, John Hendrickson.
Thank you, John Hendrickson, Kenmore, Washington. As I was saying, the city should be setting an example as you put up legislation to protect our critical areas. And you haven't been behaving in that way in the past. You don't appear to be behaving that way now. But even though you might be like a Donald Trump and figure you can take advantage of any loopholes as long as you can get away with it, we actually have a law in the books under 3670.01 that says the purpose and intent of planning under the GMA is to assure the highest standards of environmental living and to conserve the highest degree of public health, safety, morals, and welfare. They put morals in there. Why would they do that? It's a good example of just smart government. Because they know that people in your position can get carried away, get out of control, and you act without morals. Your history with the PAW from 2008 through 2016 and now demonstrates that. Okay. You're actually in the 2008 CAO handbook where they talk about the PAW, where your 2016 ordinance was reversed. You get 2 paragraphs. Everyone gets to see you as an example of what not to do. And, actually during the hearing, the city attorney made the argument that the city had to use PAW, had to amend the PAW, otherwise they couldn't use it. And I had documentation of the history of us using the PAW. And so I said, this isn't true, and we have to agree on all our documentation. And the city attorney just snapped at me and said, that was not in the record. Very forceful, very good, but not true. It was in the record. And so then they knew clearly how you guys were operating at that point, why you lost that hearing. So now you're back again. And we have Department of Ecology and Department of Commerce reviewing this stuff. They are overworked, underpaid, underfunded. And they don't really want to do appeals. They can't afford them. Last appeal they did was against Kent in 2006, was kind of a slam dunk, and it was too much. Before that, there's only 2 other ones, Walla Walla and Clititat, before 2001. So while you come with your aggression and try to do the same thing, they try to deflect it and add to that what's called mitigation sequencing. But it's really not right. Someone should appeal it. In 2015, the city was notified by DOE that your CAO was late in updating and out of date with best available science. If you look at the letters back and forth, you guys argued with them, gave them a hard time. Other cities in the North Shore area have expanded their PAW to beyond utilities to a limited degree. And one of them was Woodinville. And in 2016, I mean, did you guys have a debate about this? Was all the council unanimous, or was anyone concerned about this? And she told me, well, I don't think they actually even knew it was there. And DOE actually doesn't review that part. They review wetlands. So they're not looking at that section. DOC is responsible, Department of Commerce, for reviewing that. But I wouldn't be surprised if they don't see it either. Had about 5 or 6 examples where people nibbled away and tried to give themselves a broader exemption because they wanted to do work in a wetland for a park or something and damage the critical areas and have a double standard. I don't think anyone's reviewed it. You should know if they have or not, if you're doing your due diligence. So I think I'll just leave it there. I think that's, you're going down the wrong path again, and I don't even know why you're doing it. You're wasting a lot of money. You should have been doing more monitoring. You did a whole best available science study. Look at, I've got more stuff here for you I'm going to give to you about what we did in 2008, using the PAW illegally. And the staff telling us we could use it until some citizen hired an attorney, and then they turned around and the city attorney said, oh, we can't do it. Plain reading of the law is we can't do it. But until then, we were going to use it illegally for 3 projects.
Mr. Hendrickson, your time is up.
We lost $300,000 on those projects. There's more in here, plus RCWs and RACs.
There's nobody else signed up, Mayor.
Anybody else wishing to be heard on
Thank you.
amending the city's critical area regulations and shoreline master plan? Yes, no, I was going to come to you. I want to make sure we had the audience taken care of first. All right. Pardon? Yes. You'll need to sign up at the end.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm just a regular Kenmore resident, and I just wish that...
Can you state your name and your address, please?
Maria Jumanka. Do you want the address too? 8030 Northeast 203rd Street, Kenmore. I just wish that we as a regular residents of Kenmore have a better understanding of what exactly all these changes in critical areas and wetlands are coming our way. I'd just like to know if you are more towards protecting the wetland or more towards protecting the new projects that are happening everywhere around us. So it happened that we came to the city council. I had no idea there would be such a serious discussion about such a serious change, but I'm sure lots of other residents would like to know what's coming ahead that probably will seriously impact their lives. Just recently, it happened that we had a project that is under revision, and during the comment period, we went and showed them that the area that they're trying to build 9 homes is actually a wetland, and it has been for years. The city was just taking their report as being truthful, and after our comments, they came and revised, and now they will submit that area to SEPA regulations. But it was just us being aware and probably knowledgeable enough about the regulations. However, I feel that the rest of the Kenmore residents are not aware. They don't know, and maybe I feel like some people will take advantage of that. So I feel that if we could be more aware of what is proposed, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's all for the better, then that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. If you will go see the city clerk. Anybody else wishing to be heard? Anybody else? Ms. Anderson.
Good evening. So I am speaking for Valerie Smith with the Growth Management Services Division of the Department of Commerce. She asked me to read this email into the record. Again, we received this today at 6:33 p.m. Good afternoon. It was brought to our attention that in the Commerce 60-day review submittals for the City of Kenmore's Critical Areas Ordinance, ID number 2019-S-25874, additions were made to the PAUE section that differed from the initial draft that we reviewed in January and that we did not have a chance to review prior to tonight's hearing. Due to limited resources, we were unable to make a comment on this within the 60 days. However, we still want to get this on the record for tonight's public hearing. The following are concerns regarding the amendments to 18.55.160, Exception, Public Agency and Utility. Bullet point 1, the intended use of the PAUE section is for linear utilities. Bullet point 2, the addition of, in quotes, new nonlinear facilities, and she references item B, page 12 of the attached submittal, is not the intention of the PAUE and should not be included in the PAUE section. Our comment letter dated January 22nd, 2019 was specific to the draft ordinance proposed to us at the time, and if it had included this amended section B, we would have advised that this is out of the scope of the PAUE. Similar to other comments in the letter, we would advise that the city not consider new facilities under this exception. The city should use practical alternatives to siting these facilities. As mentioned in the letter, these new facilities should be located out of the wetland and wetland buffer. Please read this email into the record at tonight's hearing if possible. And that's from Valerie Smith with Commerce.
Anybody else wishing to be heard? Anybody else wishing to be heard? Now declare the public hearing amending the city's critical area or regulations and shoreline master plan closed. All right, so we'll move
Mayor,
on.
can we make sure your mic is on, please?
Yes, it is on.
Okay, thank you.
All right. We will move then to the next item on the business agenda, and that is ordinance number 19-0488, amending chapter 18.55 of the critical areas of Kenmore Municipal Code, repealing Division 2 of Title 16 Flood Damage Prevention of Kenmore Municipal Code, amending chapter 18.20 definitions of the Kenmore Municipal Code, amending sections 1830.190 and 1840.30 of the Kenmore Municipal Code and providing an effective date. Ms. Bent and Ms. Anderson.
I think we'd like the opportunity to provide a response to some of the public comments, if that's okay.
And that's fine.
Thank you.
Good evening again. I think perhaps since all of this public comment has centered around the public agency and utility exception, I might give just a brief history or an explanation of the PAUE. So there are three processes that a person or an agency can go through when they need an exception to the critical area variance rules, or the critical area rules. First is the PAUE, second is a variance, and third is a reasonable use exception. So a reasonable use exception is something that is typically granted to a property owner when their entire property is encumbered, and we can't take their property, so they are then allowed to go through this process to determine the smallest possible footprint of a development, and generally a development is granted after a series of tests and a critical areas report. A variance is used when you need a modification to a buffer, not to the wetland itself, but to a buffer or to a building setback off of a wetland or other critical area. And that process also has a series of review tests. The third approach has been the PAUE, and that has been for a public agency or utility. And several years ago, it was determined that really it could only be a utility. That left public agencies, including the school district and others, in the position of having to go through either a variance or a reasonable use exception, the criteria for which did not remotely address public agencies. So the city then decided to look at the public agency or utility exception. And by the way, all of these are what are called type 2 permit processes. They go through exactly the same permit process. There is no exception to the rules. The criteria are different, but all require a critical area report, all require a review against criteria, all have to look at mitigation sequencing. In other words, could it have been avoided, etc. So the processes are the same, but the titles are different and the criteria are different. So we came back to the PAUE discussion last fall, and we convened a forum with several agencies, with the school district, with Department of Ecology, with Department of Fish and Wildlife, with Department of Commerce, to talk about the PAUE and how it should be formulated. We then crafted draft regulations and sent those out to the agencies, and in January, the Department of Commerce responded. They were the only one that responded to the PAUE regulations. And we took their comments, we put them in a matrix, and we went through piece by piece, and then we amended the draft regulations to address Commerce's concerns. We sent those back out to the Department of Commerce and the other agencies at the beginning of April. On April 1st, they were emailed the revised regulations, and we have not heard from them until this evening about the PAUE. And I think ultimately what I want to stress is that there seems to be a misunderstanding from the Department of Commerce about our PAUE amendments. And the reason I say that is because their January 22nd letter suggested to us that we should narrow our PAUE exception to existing facilities. Not new, that it shouldn't be used for new facilities. It should only be for existing facilities or linear facilities like utilities and transportation corridors, which are sometimes considered utilities. So we made those amendments, and if you want to look specifically, the section that the Commerce, Valerie, is referencing is on page 14 of this particular ordinance, and the section she references says you can't use the PAUE for new facilities. If you want to do a new facility, you have to go through a reasonable use or a variance, and the staff and Planning Commission amended those sections to add criteria that were relevant to public agencies. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that I think that our new amendments were misunderstood, And I tried to contact her both at her office phone and her cell phone this evening before the meeting and could not do that. But staff feels very comfortable in continuing to recommend that this set of amendments related to the PAUE go forward. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions on this? Councilmember Marshall.
So the email this evening from Department of Commerce then does state that they do not approve of the proposed amendments.
What their email says is that the PAUE should not be used for new facilities. So we had given examples, for example, of a school that needed to expand. They needed to get rid of their portable, they needed to add new classrooms, and that would bring them closer to an existing wetland, stream, et cetera, on the property. And so that would be a candidate, an expansion of an existing facility that could be looked at through the PAUE using the criteria for the PAUE. If, on the other hand, the district came forward and said, we want to build a new school on a site that had a wetland or a stream, they would have to go through the other processes, either a variance or a reasonable use exception. And the specific language, again, that she references in her email says that adjustment of critical area standards for new site-specific and nonlinear facilities to be operated by a public agency shall be considered through the variance process if adjustments to buffers or building setbacks are required, or as a reasonable use exception if direct impacts to the critical area are proposed. This is the exact section that she's referencing about new facilities. So I think there is a misunderstanding of what we're proposing here, and I just did not have the opportunity to clarify it with her.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. So we are discussing ordinance number 19-0488 and the various amendments to various chapters. Is there any comments, any questions, any discussion on this? Councilmember Shrevenick.
I have maybe more of a point of order. Should we have a motion and then discuss?
No, we can discuss
okay.
first. Councilmember Marshall.
So I'm concerned, even though it may sound like they did make a mistake, I'm concerned about going forward without a definitive guidance or comment from Commerce. And then secondly, I do feel that even existing facilities probably ought to follow the same rules as everybody else if they are nonlinear facilities. I do believe in that balancing of values. And then secondly, I don't think that we have the best available science with regard to the Heron Rookery, being that the science is from 2012 and is 7 years old. I really appreciated the staff follow-up to my question about how that was derived, and I saw that I was encouraged that we did have a contractor and I believe science background people, I believe a wildlife biologist, work on that. But the starting point for their analysis and for all the great work of staff is this information we get from wildlife, which is 7 years old. So all this great energy and work is based on that. So I don't think we have the best available science with the Heron buffer, and I think that it should remain at 900 feet.
All right, any questions on this before we get a motion? So then the chair would entertain a motion to adopt ordinance number 19-0488. Is there a motion?
So moved.
And a second. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on this? Councilmember Shrevenick?
I somewhat concur with Councilmember Marshall on that. I'm a little bit, although I'm very supportive of what we have here, I'm a little uncomfortable with the way it's left with commerce in the question. And of course, it was their responsibility to respond before tonight, which I think was totally inappropriate. But all that's to say, we are where we are tonight. And I guess I'd feel a little more comfortable if we could get that clarification with them and that they fully understand this, and then their response once they fully understand.
Ms. Anderson, once we pass this, Commerce reviews it?
The Department of Ecology reviews it.
reviews it.
The 60-day notice to commerce has concluded, which
Okay.
She references in her letter. But the Department of Ecology, because but they only review it within the shoreline jurisdiction. So outside of the shoreline jurisdiction, which is actually where the PAUE can be applied, it can't be used in the shoreline jurisdiction, they would not be reviewing it.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second to adopt ordinance number 19-0488. Is there any further discussion on this? Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I'd be much more comfortable moving forward if we had clarification from Commerce.
All right. So it seems like consensus is that we don't want to move forward necessarily with this until we hear what Commerce's answers are. Council Member Curtis.
I don't know if we have consensus or not. I'm inclined to move ahead.
Okay.
I think we have fulfilled the legality. They missed their 60-day deadline. I think we have a good ordinance. I don't think it's going to get a lot better. And if we approve it and something bad happens, then we'll have to readdress it.
Okay. Anybody else? Clerk, Councilmember Marshall.
So, if we don't have consensus, I'd like to make a motion and call the question to see if we can table this until we get a confirmation back from
There's no
Commerce.
necessity to table. It will come back to us once they get answers. This is something that we have to do.
Well, and I'd like to,
So we don't really need to table it. It will come back when the answers are obtained.
Well, we have a motion. We haven't set the motion aside
We
yet.
have a motion in a second.
So table would be,
I mean, yeah, if you want to do that, but usually you table to a date specific, and we can't do a date specific. That's why I'm not.
I'd move that we table it until.
To what date?
Next week. I'm sure we get an answer, clarification from them back by next week.
City Manager?
Yeah, the deadline to adopt this is June 30th of this
Correct.
month.
Correct.
And so you do have one more chance to adopt this at the June 17th council meeting.
All right, so there's a motion and a second.
We don't have a second.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded to table this until next meeting.
June 17th.
Yes. You want to take the roll on this?
Sure. Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
All right, if I read the rest of this correctly, then ordinance number, or item B, item C are over with. We don't act on those because you need to take these in order.
Correct.
Okay, let's move on to item D. Ordinance number 19-0486, approving a non-exclusive dual franchise agreement with Puget Sound Energy. Ms. Owsley.
Mayor and Council, good evening. And
We are here tonight to continue the discussion of the proposed Puget Sound Energy and City of Kenmore franchise agreement and memorandum of an understanding. On May 20th, we had a fairly long discussion of the features of the proposed documents, and we'll just go through the some of the higher level points tonight, and of course I'm joined by representatives from Puget Sound Energy, Briahna and Julian Lowe. Justin McConaughey, who was with us at the previous discussion, is at the Shoreline City Council tonight. So what we are asking for tonight is your action on two documents. One is the franchise agreement, and the other is a memorandum of understanding that really focuses on performance and reliability reporting. There is only one difference from in the documents that you have before you tonight, as opposed to what you saw on May 20th, and this has to do with the term of the memorandum of understanding. We'll get into that a little bit later. So, as you know, we've been working on this for several years, and we, I think as a city, and thanks to your leadership, decided it was really time for a turnaround in conditions, particularly in reliability. And we worked with the consultant, Exponent Engineering, whose recommendations really have formed the basis of the kinds of things that we discussed with PSE over the last several years. And I think you'll see a lot of that reflected in the two documents. And in fact, PSE has really focused on a lot of those things like vegetation management and rebuilding some of the equipment that was needing updating. And you'll hear from them about the substantial investments that they have made just in the last 2 or 3 years. And I think what we're hearing is that people find that things are improving as far as outages in the neighborhoods, and those affect businesses as well. So as we said, the updated language in the memorandum of understanding was actually something that we took another look at after Councilmember Danuski raised the question on the 20th about, well, the franchise agreement is a 5-year term with the possibility of a 5-year extension. What about the MOU term? And so we thought it made sense to have something that was more consistent and mirrored that ability to extend for another 5 years. So the franchise agreement, Section 4, that talks about the term, just allows for, at the end of the 5 years, when it's time to say, oh, shall we update or extend the franchise agreement, the parties can also discuss and agree upon, do they want to extend that MOU for another 5 years as well. So, just very, very quickly, none of the other provisions of the two documents have changed since we talked with you on May 20th. A lot of this has to do with the fact that what we're updating or working on here is a 2005 franchise agreement, and so technology changes, other condition changes, and so things like, for example, let's have the best GIS mapping that we can get our hands on for where these facilities are located, and other updates. Also, like we said, vegetation management has been a big focus of these discussions, and I think we're already seeing some of the benefits of improved vegetation management, even before the agreements came to you for your action. And then the other thing that has changed a lot in our world since 2005 are all the third parties that are on power poles and utility poles. And so we took the experiences that we've had in our own city projects and then also the different conditions of dealing with multiple third parties. And then the MOU, as we said, that is still very, very focused on reliability and what are the things that we want to be coming back to council once a year with the reliability standards. There are 10 circuits in Kenmore. Where we started was 7 of them were in the lowest quartile in the entire PSE system. We have some very specific goals for what we'd like to and expect to see as far as the most underperforming circuits and how that we think is going to be changing. And again, we've continued to work with Exponent Engineering to get their perspective on the reporting that has come into the UTC. So there's a focus on that. And then, of course, as we discussed on the 20th, there is language in the MOU about the opportunities for electric vehicle charging facilities, and that is part of a larger pilot project that PSE has gotten UTC approval for just at the end of last year. So with that, we'll have time for discussion, I think after PSE has a chance to do their presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Julian Lowe, Puget Sound Energy, here with Raylan Asa. As we go ahead and load up here. Thank you again so much. So again, we're just going to go ahead and quickly go through some of the information we presented at the last council meeting, and then I'm pleased to share information about our meter upgrade project as well. Again, we're pleased to be here again and respectfully asking for council approval on the franchise and MOU. Again, we feel these new versions of the documents incorporated the changes that council requested last year. Again, improved reliability reporting, vegetation management, issues involving co-locators and facility relocation. Again, Nancy touched on the technical edit to the MOU so that the timing of that MOU matches up with the franchise. Again, I'll touch a little bit on the EV infrastructure installation pilot. And then, again, we feel really strongly about the reliability improvements we've made here in Kenmore to date and the ones that are ahead for the city as well. Again, just really want to put in a deep appreciation and thanks to staff's work on this. So again, Nancy Owsley, Don Raytom, thank you all so much. So now I'd like to turn it over to Ray Lynn to touch on some of the infrastructure improvements.
All right, we'll get started right in with what we've done to date, and then we'll jump into what we're planning to do. I know you've seen myself earlier, and then my employee Justin talk through these, but we'll go over in case members of the audience haven't heard about them. 2016 to 2018, we did a variety of projects, but I'll quickly highlight our biggest ones. The first one is, you'll see number 5 on the list. We rebuilt the main transmission backbone that serves Kenmore. It's the Morelands-Vatuli. That's what we call it. We have funny names for our transmission lines. That's the. It is a funny name. It's a good name. It's a fine name. So that we rebuilt that in 2016, and then came back and did some more work in 2017 on that line as well. Then in 2017, we rebuilt 2 of the worst performing circuits in the city of Kenmore and across PSE's territory overall, which is You can see on the map, number 8 and 7, and as also a number 6 as well. So we rebuilt those, and then last year, the biggest improvement to overall reliability for Kenmore came from rebuilding the Kenmore substation, and that's number 9 on the map. This follows exactly how we rebuild systems overall. Transmission first, because that's where you get your biggest quote-unquote bang for your buck. It serves the most people. It distributes power across a wide area. Then we come in and we rebuild the circuits, the main backbone that serves your neighborhood. And then we rebuild the substation, because that gives ability to communicate smartly with our command center, and it also has the ability to operate a little bit more automatically. We don't have to have a wireman, they're called, in there all the time. When something goes wrong, it can do a lot of automatic switching on and off. So that was in 2018. Those were the biggest projects we had, and then I'll jump into 2019 and beyond. Oops, we're not. Part of what we did, sorry, I apologize, is focused a lot, as Nancy mentioned, on vegetation management. You've probably seen us out and about. We have more work coming this year. It takes a lot of equipment to take down trees and to limb trees. Kenmore is a beautiful city with many trees, and so they always impact reliability. So we're working hard to make sure that we get ahead of the game and turn those out as we're able. I'm going to jump into what we have planned first and then go back. This year, we will be rebuilding the Inglewood substation, which is by Inglemore High School. That's planned for this year. It's number 4 on this map. We also have one of the Inglewood substation feeders, number 1, being rebuilt, and we'll be continuing to rebuild what is part of our Kenmore 26 circuit, which is number 7, and number 2 on that map up there. Another great thing that's coming to Kenmore is additional smart infrastructure. So Kenmore already has, in South Kenmore, some self-healing elements on our system, which allows it to close back in and try to bring power back to people quickly if an event happens on the system. We have that along Juanita Drive and some other areas close to Juanita Drive. We'll be distributing that more widespread through Kenmore. So there's quite a few spots, as you can see on the map, those X's, that'll be bringing more smart infrastructure, which just means that it continues to minimize the outages when a car pole accident happens, or we have a lightning strike, or we have a large windstorm. It'll just really isolate down to the number of customers. What would have been 1,000 or 2,000 customers before, maybe last year with the improvements we did would have been 500 customers. This year will be in the neighborhood of a couple hundred customers. It'll be out if it's a more isolated event. Now I'll quickly go back up to your overall reliability snapshot. As Nancy mentioned, and I think everybody's experienced, Kenmore had some reliability challenges in the past. We've managed to get up with the improvements we've done to date to get the whole city of Kenmore within 20 minutes of our PSC average. With a significant work coming again this coming year and the following, we're anticipating that will continue to improve quite a bit. That's why I wanted to quickly, go over, and if you've got any questions for us about that, you can see me after.
Thank you. And, one of the priorities that we also recognize that Kenmore leadership has shared is on sustainability, certainly as a member of K4C. But, we certainly recognize that customers throughout our service territory want a cleaner energy future. And, we are working together with our customers to do that. Certainly, during the debate over the state legislative session, we were supportive of the bill that ultimately passed. We were stressing, again, the issues involving reliability, affordability in terms of, bills that customers can manage while this transition occurs. And so I touched on a little bit of of that issue last meeting. And then also, again, we fully recognize Kenmore and many other cities' interests for EV infrastructure installation. And again, throughout this year, we'll be conducting a robust education outreach effort throughout our service territory. And then I did touch on, again, the 3 areas involving residential charging, multifamily charging, workplace charging, and then also public charging, of course. And again, as I mentioned at the previous meeting, we are, of course, going to be working with Kenmore stakeholders at the residential level, business level, to make sure that all these opportunities are made available and aware to, again, residential, multifamily customers and others, making sure that folks are aware of these programs and making sure that folks are able to apply for them as they'd like. I'd also like to, of course, touch on one of the issues that came up during public comment involving the upgrade of our meters. That's something that we're doing throughout our service territory in order to meet current industry standards. We've undertaken a 6-year effort that began last year, ongoing through 2023, to change out almost 2 million meters. That's roughly 1 million on our electric service, and then roughly 800,000 in terms of natural gas. Again, this is an opportunity whereby we are changing out meters at customers' homes or businesses. It's basically moving to infrastructure that is two-way, communicating from the meter to a secured wireless network. Roughly 20 years ago, PSE was an industry leader in going from meters to advanced meter reading. That's AMR is the acronym that you may hear. And that infrastructure is reaching the end of its useful life. And so Puget Sound Energy, like utilities across the nation, are upgrading their infrastructure. And so Kenmore is slated to see upgrades to its meters beginning in the next several weeks. And again, we want to do all that we can to minimize issues and make customers aware of these upgrades. Again, we see this as a normal course of business to upgrade custom meters. For those customers who are interested in opting out of this program and choosing a non-communicating meter, folks are certainly welcome to contact our customer care center in order to opt out. There will be associated with that a bi-monthly service charge. Again, that's to cover the costs of sending someone out to that meter to do the reading, as opposed to, again, the two-way communication that would occur through the meter upgrade project. And so with that, pleased to take any questions. But again, respectfully asking for council's approval tonight of the franchise and memorandum of understanding.
Any questions? Councilmember Marshall.
Any response in particular to the question? I don't know about it. I just heard about it from Ms. Grayland tonight, but about health concerns on as to the new meters.
Sure. So I think there was an issue mentioned regarding radio frequencies, and currently our AMR infrastructure that is attached to homes and businesses today emits a very low amount of radio frequencies, and this new technology will actually emit slightly lower levels.
Any other questions? Chair will entertain a motion then to pass ordinance number 19-0486, approving a non-exclusive dual franchise agreement with Puget Sound Energy, Inc.
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
All right. Passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda then is contract number 19-C2043, Memorandum of Understanding with Puget Sound Energy, Inc. on performance and reliability reporting. Is there any questions or any discussion on this? If there are none, Chair will entertain a motion to approve contract number 19-C2043, a memorandum of understanding with Puget Sound Energy, Inc. on performance and reliability reporting.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Sorry, who was the second?
We'll take Rick
Councilmember
Danuski, or Deputy Mayor.
Councilmember Danuski?
It was a tie there. Any further questions, discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Lowe, if you would be so kind as to have somebody answer the questions and concern of Ms. Graybar at the appropriate time.
Okay. Yeah, certainly folks.
Just make sure her questions get answered to the best of PSC's ability.
Sure. So, Mayor, council members, if folks are at all curious about our meter upgrade project, you can visit psc.com/meter upgrade. And again, we feel the meters are, of course, safe. And, but again, if council or staff have any additional questions, happy to address those. But again, that's the best site for information about the program and effort.
Great. So I appreciate your talking to Ms. Grayland. Those are really no different than what the water NUD is doing with their remote meters, and everybody else seems to be going to. So really no difference, right?
Absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Mr. Mayor, if I could
Yes,
take
please.
1 minute and just thank the council for your leadership and really clear guidance to us over the last few years as we've worked on this. Thank the PSE team for good faith discussions over that period of time too. They didn't mention this tonight, but just in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been about $19 million invested in reliability improvements. We want to see that continue, but I think we're off to a really good start. Thanks also to Don Rayton, who has worked with us from day one on this issue as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Owsley.
All right.
PSC.
Next item on the agenda is city communications and staff report, I guess it is, with...
How about hangar and also item D from consent?
Oh, yeah, right. Item, yes. Hangar, building facility use policy, Mr. Carlinzy.
How's everybody doing tonight? All right, so the hangar in Town Square are fulfilling the vision you had for it. I just drove by today and it was just pure eye candy. Our city attorney, Don Rayton, got here a little early today, so what did she do? She went to go hang out at the Town Square and hangar, and she got some work done while kids frolicked in the water feature. And I drove by today and it was just a ton of people just really enjoying that public feature that you were able to have a vision for and get constructed. And So it's really exciting to see that that vision that you had is being fulfilled. We're 18 months, a little more than 18 months now, maybe like 19 months now, into actually doing reservations for the hangar. And overall, they've been going well, but we do have some tweaks now based on experience in doing these reservations, so we're recommending some adjustments to the policy. One of them is eligibility to reserve space. We're finding that the space itself we're having no trouble having that space be used all day long, every day. And so we're actually recommending that for reserving the Otter Room and the Beaver Room, that non-residents not be allowed to reserve the Otter Room and the Beaver Room. It's the Kenmore citizens that paid for that structure, and given the activity and the demand for the space, we were thinking it'd make sense for it to be reserved for Kenmore residents. We are making a slight differentiation between the Otter Room and the Beaver Room. So you see that on the council bill and also in the proposed policy. We're proposing that the following may reserve the Otter Room, which is the bigger space in the hangar. Residents of Kenmore and any nonprofit registers as a 501c3. And then the following cannot reserve the Otter Room: non-residents and for-profit businesses. For the Beaver Room, which is that smaller conference room, we're recommending that residents of Kenmore be able to reserve it, any nonprofit, and for-profit businesses physically located with a mailing address within the city, and also Kenmore business incubator clients. We have some incubator clients that we're trying to attract to the city, or they're just right outside the city, and as kind of a perk or a benefit of being in the incubator, we're recommending that they be able to use the Beaver Room. And then you can see the following cannot reserve the Beaver Room. Again, this is proposed. Non-residents and for-profit businesses that don't meet that criteria that I just mentioned. We're also recommending refundable deposits for larger groups, 30 or more. So what happens is, in our lease with Diva Espresso, they require that groups of 30 or more provide, is it 30 days notice? Come on, where is that? Sorry. That was several weeks' notice for advance reservations of 30 or more people. The reason is the Diva Espresso needs to staff up and stock up, have that much notice for the bigger groups. But there's been a few cases where these larger groups didn't even show up, or they overstayed their time, or they left a mess, and so we're proposing to charge a deposit for these larger groups. And then also, we're adjusting our language on what we call limited public forum. That the hangar is different from City Hall. City Hall is more of the seat of government, but the hangar is more of a public space that has a wider range of uses. And so we're saying that it's still a limited public forum, but we're no longer saying that you can't have political activities in the hangar, or religious for that matter. And so that is something that Councilmember Marshall pointed out, and I appreciate that, and Don Rayton concurred with that. Councilmember Shrebnick had some great proposed edits that she got me last week. I appreciate that. And if I could take you to those proposed edits. Did not make it into the packet, so I'm actually asking you to consider these tonight. So if you go to page 3 of the actual policy, for group size of 30 or more, if food is being brought in, catered or potlucked, then we forgot to mention that the the deposit needs to be not refunded for no-shows like we did for groups where there is no food. So just right at the end of that first bullet on page 3 under deposits, I'm proposing to add a sentence that says, $100 of this deposit will not be refunded for no-shows. Also, Councilmember Shrevenick recommends that the sentence right before that be deleted. So this deposit will not be required when attendees incidentally and individually order food or beverage from the hangar retail tenant. We just put that in there because we wanted to clarify that informal food just incidentally brought in by attendees doesn't trigger the deposit. But I think Councilmember Shrevenick, if you want to add to this, I think you feel like it's redundant given the second bullet. So I'm fine with deleting it or keeping it. And then lastly, bottom of page 5 under late arrivals, Councilmember Shrevenick mentioned where it says change, the last sentence there, changes to the reservation start time must be made within 48 hours. It actually should be at least 48 hours in advance of the reservation date. So with that, do you have any questions?
Councilmember Smith.
Hey, Rob, I have a question on, I guess it would be page 4 on the Beaver Room reservations, where you have 4 bullet points. I'll wait till the end. My question is, on bullet point number 3, is it possible that there are for-profit businesses physically located in Kenmore that do not have a Kenmore mailing address? Like maybe they have a P.O. box in Seattle or something, just for whatever reason. And I bring that up because it's very specific of what it's saying. And I thought, maybe, is it reasonable to say for-profit businesses physically located in the city of Kenmore, regardless of what the address is?
Sure, yeah. Well,
there may be another side of this I haven't thought about. I wanted to ask you that.
What we were thinking of is kind of the reverse. There could be a business that has a P.O. box in Kenmore, but isn't in Kenmore. And we didn't want them to say, well, we're here in Kenmore, we have a P.O. box. But I think that's fine. If you wanted to just say physically located in Kenmore, period, I think that works. Yeah. Physically located in Kenmore.
Another thought, and I don't know if this is solely for physical locations in Kenmore, but on our business registration, we have close to 1,000 businesses. Is it assumed that every one of those businesses is located in our city limits?
Yeah, that's right.
That's it. And, okay, so that's covered then by this. That's what I was trying to also get at. Okay.
Deputy Mayor.
So going to the deposit question, how did staff arrive at $150? It seems, I don't know, it just catches me as being possibly a little steep. And then on the third part, we're talking about $50 of the deposit won't be refunded for groups of 30 or more who overstayed their reservation. How do you determine whether or not a group overstayed their reservation, or if they just dissipated slowly, or who's kind of adjudicating that?
Yeah, on the deposit question, we didn't have any science behind it or anything, but we just thought it would be enough of an incentive to get people to clean up their mess and, and show up. But it's up to you if you want it higher or lower.
No, I was just curious if there was, what the rationale was.
Yeah. And then that last bullet, the 10 minutes past the reservation date. Tell me your question.
Who adjudicates whether people overstayed as a group, or if they just were still in the space doing other things, or, it's a public space. It's a little ambiguous as to whether it's still being used for what it was reserved for, or, I don't know. It just seems like a very kind of squishy spot. And who makes the call?
Yeah, the person that makes the call is our custodian, who will be on duty at the time. And we did have at least one case that I know of where there was this big group. It was for a 1-year-old's birthday party, and they stayed I mean, the party lasted long after their reservation date or time, and so, you know, if it's a big group and they're still dominating the space, then I think they would overstay their time.
Okay.
Councilmember Marshall?
Could the city attorney summarize the difference between traditional public forum and limited public forum, and then summarize what activity then would be allowed in the hangar?
You ask a very interesting question. Can I? Yes. It may not be, I will try to make it as succinct as possible because there's decades of case law to that. But let's go with the first. I think you asked about traditional public forum. There are what's called traditional public forum, or what you think. It's by history, people have exercised their First Amendment rights, which are in parks and sidewalks with pickets, or on the proverbial soapbox. So those are traditional public forum, and First Amendment attaches great protections to them. Over the years, because of course we have the First Amendment rights, there have been people who would like to exercise their right to speech in non-traditional public forums, which are potentially a retail space, or in the back of the city hall, areas that could appear public, but in fact are not. They're limited for a reason. So transitioning from the one, traditional, to the limited, courts have been struggling with, okay, when do these First Amendment rights and the very protective restrictions apply and not. A limited public forum is something that the city has opened up intentionally, but not to the full forum. It has a reason to do it, much like social media. You're not saying, anyone come advertise on here. You're identifying a certain message. Same with the hangar. It's, again, first and foremost, as you identify in your policies, this was opened as a retail area with a lease, but also tangentially, we would like you to come and use it this way. So we've identified in your policies that we believe are at least articulating this is a limited public forum. So to some extent, we will allow everyone to use it on an equal, non-discriminatory basis. But it is not a park and it is not a sidewalk, so please adhere to our policies.
Councilmember Marshall?
So it doesn't discriminate on the basis of viewpoints.
That is correct.
Of the groups that use it within the city's rules.
That is correct, because even with a limited public forum, you can't do that. You can't discriminate based on viewpoint.
Any other questions? All right, so then I guess we need a motion to approve the proposed amendments to the hangar building facility use policy. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second, as long as we're talking about as amended with the 3+1 amendments, so 4 amendments, 4 corrections.
We accept that as amended.
Yes.
So the motion before us then is to approve the proposed amendments as amended to the hangar building facility use policy. Any further discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall?
Appreciating the work, but having some further reservations, no.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
6-1.
All right. Now, we move to item D that was pulled. City Manager.
Yeah, so Kenmore Waterfront Activity Center uses Squires Landing to do paddling programs and rowing programs. And part of their agreement to use that facility is to provide an annual report on things they did and volunteer hours and programs and all that. And so they've provided that report. Councilmember Srebnick had a possible thought or addition.
Yeah, and I think it may be, you know, a separate paragraph or two. It doesn't have to be in this particular report. Historically, we have not asked for expenditure reports, but in 2017, end of 2017, in the budget cycle, the council approved, I believe, something on the order of $30,000 to go to KWAC, which was then spent in 2018. And it would be, I think, nice to have a very brief summary of how that money has either already been used or plans for that. So that's the main thing. I would also personally appreciate a little bit more clarification on the scholarship piece. And that is a contract requirement, so, and that is supposed to go in each report. So I know there was very few kids that were able to get those scholarships, so it'd be nice to have maybe a little clearer articulation of what is their plan for lowering barriers to getting those scholarships.
Yes, so I'm happy to get the information that Councilmember Srebnick is requesting.
So you're bringing that back to us?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You can move to receive and file the existing report, or you can wait until you get everything that Councilmember Srebnick has requested. It's up to you.
You're firing what?
I'm fine with moving to
Okay.
file it and then get the other information.
All right. So then, we don't do this very often. A motion and a second, I guess, to move item D back. It's not going to be on consent, is it?
You can just,
No.
a motion to receive and file.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, motion to receive and file the Kenmore Waterfront Activity Center yearly report.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Since it's part of the consent agenda, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The acceptance of the report is unanimous. All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with approving, obviously, I just voted for it. But I'm just curious, am I the only one that found this to be a very oddly laid out report? It just seems like the expense just seemed, the way they've laid this out on this operating statement just seemed a little odd and actually didn't always make sense. But if you take time, you figure out what they're trying to do. I don't know who does it, but it sure would be nice to have something that was a little more.
Talking about at the end of the report?
Yeah.
After the kind of the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, exactly. The very last 2 pages, but specifically the very last page. It just seemed, it didn't always make sense exactly because, and I guess part of it is I don't know what these different funds are that they're talking about.
Oh, yeah. It took me a minute to try to figure that out as well. My understanding is that they had to account for the different clubs, which affected the final fund balance.
So those are actual expenses then, where they're talking about those funds? Because they've got it under the total expenses.
I know they have it under expenses, but I believe it's more of like transferring to reserves, or for lack of a better term, for those particular clubs.
So do you have, I'm sorry, I should have asked this before we voted on it, but do you happen to know why, or how they're covering then if they have a budget that's like $3,500 less than what they actually spent? Do you know where that covering amount's coming from?
No, but I can get that for you. I'm looking at it and a handwritten edit that I had suggested actually did not make it on there. See that handwritten net income?
Oh,
That's my writing, and that did not make it onto the report. So I was hoping it would, but
Okay.
I think the net income line would have helped clarify this quite a bit.
Okay, thanks.
So I will go back to them and try to get better clarification on that as well.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
This is a point of clarification. Normally, I think we don't require them to provide an expenditure report. Isn't that correct? So they're and they are an independent nonprofit. I mean, I also found it very confusing, but I was trying to separate our role relative to theirs. Can you refresh my memory of what the requirement is for their reporting?
I'd have to look.
I think it doesn't, I'm pretty sure it doesn't include financial, but.
Yeah, given that, as long as they're paying their bills and.
Well,
yeah.
but didn't we give them they got some money from us, right?
Yes, and so that's
and I
what
guess
we're gonna
that's
report back
why
on.
it is
Yeah.
relevant, and that's why if their expenses, their operating expenses are higher than their budget, I just want to make sure it's not coming from what the money we gave them to, I think it was to buy something else.
Yeah.
If I'm recalling.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Clarify the piece.
Yes, I think you're right.
Okay. All right.
All right. Ready to move on? City communication flags. Don Raton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at the last meeting, I believe it was May 20th, at the end, during the staff report section, when the council was deciding whether or not to support the proclamation, a question came up whether or not if the council determined to fly the pride flag, would that then require that they also be made to allow other expressions of communication, such as, I think the example was like the Nazi flag. And I said, like I said earlier, that was a good question, and I will get back to you on that. And that's really what the staff report's about. The short answer is no. The reason behind that, I'll again try to keep this succinct because it's decades of First Amendment law. The reason it is not is because what the request or this council would be doing is what's called government speech. You are actually speaking, and you are expressing yourself. And the courts and the Supreme Court has said the government gets to speak, and First Amendment rights don't attach to that, as long as you're clear that it's your communication, not somebody else. You're not trying to regulate somebody else's regulation. And with that, I have recommended that you identify that this is, if you so choose, that would be, again, your expression and communication to the citizens. So that is the case law, and that is then your prerogative to decide what that expression will be.
Deputy Mayor.
Could we include, we're doing a resolution next week. Could we include a line about flying the flag in the resolution as a way to mark that?
Absolutely,
Okay.
and that was my recommendation.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Councilmember Shrubnik.
Well, it's not exactly a question, I guess, but I was looking around a little bit for, whether other cities around us are flying them for a month or a week or a weekend or during the parade or, what, and it was heartened to see that both Bothell and Kirkland are flying their pride flags for a full month.
And if I
So
may,
that's
I look
nice.
out at the city of Bellevue, and so are they.
Any others? All right, Affordable Housing Panel.
Okay, so just for clarification on the flag, we'll put in that sentence in the proclamation, and then you'll approve that
Right.
on the 17th, and then that very next day, we'll hoist the flag. Okay, all right? All right.
Are we in agreement?
All right.
I'm looking. Ms. Srebnick, are we in agreement? I'm looking. Flying the flag.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Fine. Not opposing it. Okay, fine. Yes, in the resolution,
Proclamation.
proclamation.
Proclamation, yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Were we going to change at least the declaration to month rather than week?
Up to you guys.
Nice to see the proclamation. I was kind of hoping we would have that to review.
Okay, so.
Oh,
nice to see the
it's
proclamation.
in next week's packet already. Got published on Friday. I mean, I'm fine with expanding it, but
My mistake, sorry.
I guess the question I would have, do we have a month for anything else?
I don't know that any of our yes, we do have. We've done proclamations for a month for a number of different
Oh, I didn't see
causes.
Yeah.
But this one, I think nationally is a week, but I understand what they're trying to do. So I don't know. I'm looking for guidance here.
I'd move that we adopt it, at least in the proclamation, say for Pride Month.
I'll second.
All right. Is there general consensus on this Pride Month? I'm looking for nods. Okay. If we can get in the resolution the flag for Pride Month.
Okay.
So there was a motion and a second, but just,
So I'll, okay,
Hearing no
so there's
objections.
a formal motion on the table.
mhm.
So all those in favor of making it Pride Month and flying the flag for the month? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I would like to abstain,
Okay.
and it's for personal reasons. So today's my mom's 89th birthday. I'm the oldest of 3 boys, have 2 children, 9 grandchildren, and I happen to believe in traditional family. And I think we can have difference of opinion and still respect each other. And hopefully we'll all respect each other's opinions, even though we often have different opinions.
All right, so 1 abstention, 6 ayes. All right, next item, Affordable Housing Panel.
All right, well, Debbie and Lori are coming up. I'll try to preview this a little bit. Last year, you wanted us to bring forward a kind of an expert panel on TOD, and then that discussion evolved into, wow, you're way down there, hi. That's okay, you're fine, you're fine. And at the retreat, you asked us to put together a TOD, or a expert panel on, well, you know what, I'll let Debbie take it from here, because I'm not quite sure. That's why we're here tonight, is get clarification from you on what kind of a panel you want and what kind of questions you want answered. And there is something in your packet on this.
That's right. So at your retreat in January, you had a discussion of the broad topic of affordable housing, and you concluded that it was important to have a suite of options to address affordable housing, including ADUs. ADUs is on the docket this year for the Planning Commission, and they'll be bringing forward a recommendation later this year. The In your retreat, you have agreements, which kind of reflect what you expect to come forward. And agreement number 4 in the retreat report said that for 2020, make item A1C a tier 1 item in the housing strategy. And what that is it's to consider provisions, including design guidelines, to allow some flexibility in single-family neighborhoods for small-scale housing, for example, cottages and duplexes. So that was the agreement for number 4. Following right on the tail of that was agreement number 5, was for staff to put together a developer panel on what works and what doesn't to create incentives for housing options. So reading those two things together, that is why we're suggesting from the staff perspective a developer panel to address some options that might increase affordability in the single-family neighborhoods. And so the memo that was in your packet for tonight has some suggestions about what a panel would be. So from a series of questions, first of all, the question would be, does the council still want to have a affordable housing panel? And then a follow-up question would be, if the answer to that is yes, are you still interested in seeing that panel reflect options for single-family neighborhoods? And if the answer to that is yes, and do you concur or have any questions on the staff recommendation for potential panelists?
All right, so let's deal with these one at a time then. So are we still interested in having a panel? Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Curtis, Councilmember Marshall, Councilmember Shrubnik. So yes, we're interested in having a panel.
Okay. So the second questioning would be, and would that panel reflect talking about options for single-family neighborhoods? And
All right, options for single-family neighborhoods.
Yeah, but, I mean, for me, yes, but not limited to, I guess.
Not limited
Well,
to.
I mean, that's not the only place that we're trying to get affordable units.
It is, and I think the reason that we were suggesting that is sort of to try and reflect what council was discussing at the retreat. So you could make it broader, but I think if you make it broader, it depends on how broad you make it. It then might be difficult to sort of frame the discussion.
I mean, when you get into the downtown area and that, you've got multifamily housing options. And so I think this is more dealing with single-family. Councilmember?
Yeah,
Smith?
actually, that was the point I was going to make. I mean, we've spent a lot of time like on our TOD and trying to figure out what we're doing there. And I think it would be nice to try to focus a little more outside of the TOD to understand, because we really never have had, I mean, we've never really had any significant discussion other than to say we all agree ADUs are great. But we've never really talked about things we can do. We did have a tiny house discussion, I remember a couple of years ago, but I would like to keep it focused outside of the actual urban core, just to have the discussion.
Tiny houses and cottage housing and different types of housing that would work. So I'm getting that we want to do that, to look at different types of housing in single-family neighborhoods.
Okay, and in your memo, we listed some potential panelists that we could bring in to talk about cottage housing, ADUs and tiny houses, duplexes in single-family zones, and also to bring in maybe somebody that could talk about different ways for infill, how you could obtain infill in single-family
And I guess
homes.
I'd be interested in some developers. There is one or two that come to mind that can give us some enlightenment and understanding about financing and how we could make this work.
Okay.
Any thoughts? Anybody else? Councilmember Smith?
The one thought, and I know this sounds contrary to what I just said when I talked about having a discussion, but one of the fears that I have is that we go overboard. And I realize you have to start somewhere with the conversation, but Seattle has gone nuts on this.
Yeah.
And they've basically, I mean, it's going to dramatically change their single-family neighborhoods. And I hope we don't even consider to even remotely go down as far as they've gone down that path. But I think there's a lot of things we can do that would be favorable. So I know that's more of a statement, I guess, just on my own feelings on it. But everything that we've done on surveying our citizens, they value the single-family neighborhood. So we have
absolutely.
we really have to make sure that is part of
Right.
that in the, when we kind of scope out the discussion.
That's why cottage houses or smaller houses or duplexes, it's still single-family and doesn't, I think, hurt the character of the neighborhoods much. But you're right, I mean, certainly have to have the public's input on this too. Clear?
Could I ask one
Ms.
question
Anderson, yes.
about the financing? So initial thoughts were we would have developers and builders come in and talk about, you know, what makes this type of a project doable and feasible. Is that what you mean by?
Yeah, because there'd be some shortfalls. Some of the things that we're trying to do, I think, would require some subsidies of some sort to make them pencil out. And how do we do that?
So you want someone who can speak to city subsidies of these
Not
housing types?
necessarily. There are developers that have ideas on how they can finance something and make things pencil out for them. And we all know that at 30% median income, there's got to be subsidies involved. But, you know, when you're up in the 60%, 70%, that if the cost of land comes down, then it may be doable. But, I mean, there's things that we need to understand about that. Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yeah, and this is tagging on to what Mayor Baker said. I think your potential questions number 2, if that could be maybe nuanced a bit more, what level of affordability can you achieve with the given type? And, you know, what arrangements need to be made to bring that level down to, you know, 50% AMI or 30% AMI? What have they done? What have they seen done by other developers to achieve those levels?
You know, one of the concerns I have is the couple of, you know, I'm serving on the governor's committee with having to do with middle income housing, and then the regional affordable housing task force that I co-chaired. It was 60% and below. Well, the developer sees that, or 60%. I think they used and below. Developer sees that, they're going to go for 60%. They're not going to look at 30. You know, and I wanted to spell out 30. And the same thing with 80%. It's all great that it's 80%, but that's what a developer is going to focus on, and they're not going to look at 60%. They're not going to look at 50%. So I want to try to understand that a little bit better. Because if we're going to do this, the whole purpose is to affect the entry levels for different housing types in our community. And I think it's important that if we're going to do this, we have understandings of, are we really going to affect anything, or is the price still going to be way up there? Councilmember Smith.
So I think that's a really good point. That's why I actually think the number one bullet point you have on possible panelists, the cottage housing, is I think a really important part, because you can have cottage housing that is very expensive, even though they're small, or you can have cottage housing that's very affordable, and it really depends what you're trying to accomplish. And so I think that's highly appealing to me, because it's something we don't have in our city, and it's something that maybe there's a better way to look at it. I can think of examples just in my work where I've seen it, but it would be nice to know what it takes to make that happen and to make it, you know, economically viable for a developer, as well as, you know, not, I guess that's the most important part, because if it's not economically feasible, then nobody's going to do it.
Councilmember Curtis.
I guess related to that, I guess I'd like somebody to answer the question for me. If a developer has an acre, they know they can put 6 huge houses on and make money in Kenmore. So how many cottage houses would it take to make the same amount of profit? So that's the question I'd like somebody to answer. And it might be, 150, in which case this is never going to work. Or it might be something rational that we could change some zoning. But without the data, I just don't have a clue, really whether it's feasible or not.
That's what makes it so tough, is because if you've got a piece of land, it's just natural economics that people want to maximize the profit from that land. And so it always makes sense to go bigger than smaller. And it would be nice to figure out how you can counteract that.
That's the point, is can we change some zoning or something so they could make the same amount of profit doing cottage housing or the 6 huge houses?
Councilmember Marshall.
And my brief interest would be, for looking at these different options, what would be in general effects on density and open space, like yard setback requirements? Is there likely to be the same amount of open space or different amount of open space, or could we create different tools that would adjust for that? Things like that. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll do our best to see if we can find some data to address your questions, and we'll now kind of proceed forward with putting that panel together. We're anticipating that this will probably be in September, and we thought that would probably be a better time of year to get more public participation, and that would tee up nicely with the Planning Commission's work on ADUs.
Great.
Okay.
And I'll try to find you a name or two from one of the committees where we had
That'd be great.
people on an advisory panel.
Great, thank you.
Mr. City Manager?
Just one more thing, and it's regarding Lake Point. So we're thinking that, definition of insanity, right? Don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So we've actually been talking to a real estate expert here in the Seattle area named Brian O'Connor. He consulted with us on the HRNA study, and we asked him to put together a scope of work to take a different look at Lake Point, more than the traditional pack in as much as you can for profitability. And he thinks that a less is more scenario might be worth looking into. And so he's put together a scope of work. We're going to put together a draft contract with him based on that scope of work and bring it forward for your consideration at the July 8th City Council meeting. So stay tuned for that. And that's all I have.
All right. Comments, reports, initiatives. Councilmember Danuski.
Nothing to add.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Nothing to add.
Councilmember Curtis.
Nothing to add?
Councilmember Marshall.
Nothing to add.
Councilmember Smith.
Nothing, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
I spent my afternoon at a elected officials K4C meeting chaired by Executive Constantine downtown. It was inspiring to see leaders from all over the county meeting together to discuss how we're going to tackle the climate crisis. We have some interesting opportunities now with the state law mandating that all of our energy be produced from, that all of our electricity be coming from non-fossil fuel sources. We have an opportunity to really move the needle when it comes to things like how transportation affects our carbon output, because we already have a pretty good power mix, but once you take the fossil fuels out of that, if we can, as a city, work to incentivize electric cars, things like that, that'll start making an even more meaningful dent in our city's carbon output. Also, the thing I thought was interesting was the impact of buildings and heating in climate, and cities do have a role when it comes to looking at building codes. And there are things, Shoreline took a big step in their TOD area around their sound transit stations, mandating that the new buildings that are going in there be, I can't remember the exact designation, but it's not LEED, but it was something like that. And some people said, well, it's going to depress the permits, but they've had something like 200 permits come in that area in the last year. So things are really moving very quickly, and these buildings are going to be much more efficient and just better all around. So I think there's some interesting stuff cities are going to be able to do. We are going to be, the original agreement with K4C in 2014, before we were on, there was a letter that was signed by all the cities kind of agreeing to some very high-level principles. I think we've seen that letter when we were going through materials when we first were talking about joining. There is talk about updating the letter, mostly just to get the new cities that have joined on the letter and maybe cleaning up some of the language and tightening things up a little bit. So that'll probably be circulating at some point between now and October 7th, which is the next meeting. But it was a good meeting. It was inspiring, and there's a lot of good work going on there. So I'm happy that we're plugged in.
All right. So, July 4th, there's a pie eating contest. They're looking for people to be in it at the North Shore Senior Center. So anybody wants to be in a pie eating contest, please contact us. We would love to have some entrants. And if there's nothing further to come before us, we're adjourned.
Go give it that beard of yours a little